So in this video we'll just be taking a look at financial markets. So we'll be taking a look at types of subsidiary markets that exist, issues faced by markets, what we refer to as intermediated and direct finance. So subsidiary markets are simply these. So we've got different financial markets, and then we've got what we call money markets and capital markets. Now, money markets are simply short-term markets, whereas capital markets are more long-term. So money markets, we have things like the bills, short-term bill market, whereas in the capital markets, it's sort of things like the ASX and bonds. So in each of these markets then, we have primary and secondary markets. Primary markets are simply the issue of any new securities. So think about it as new debt issues. So something that no one else has owned previously. The company itself is issuing these straight into the market. Whereas the secondary market is something that someone else has owned. So if you buy shares from the ASX, someone else has owned them. That's a secondary market. However, if you were to buy shares that had just been issued to the market, that would be a primary market transaction and would fall under the primary market. So you can see here that we have primary market is going to be new shares or long-term debt issues in the capital market, and your secondary market is going to be any existing securities. Whereas for the money market, your primary market is going to be any new securities up to 1 year maturity, and the secondary market, although maybe not as common, would be if someone was to buy a security with a maturity less than 1 year and then would sell it maybe 6 months in and someone else would buy it. That would be the secondary market that existed within there. So just remember, there are primary market transactions and secondary market transactions. Now, one of the major issues faced by markets is what's called the matching principle. So in theory, short-term investments should be funded by short-term finance, and long-term investments should be funded by long-term finance. Now, in reality, it's easier to get short-term finance. It's lower risk. However, and therefore, most companies can find it a lot easier to get short-term finance. Now, you might say, what's the problem in getting short-term finance to fund a long-term investment? And there's not much of a problem, as you can just, if it's for 1 year, roll it over at the end of that year. Be like, okay, we want to renew it again. And in most scenarios, that works. If you've paid all your relevant fees and haven't defaulted on anything, the bank's more than likely to just be like, all right, we'll roll it over. However, the problem arises in a credit crunch. So a lot of businesses came into problems during the GFC because they had these long-term investments funded by short-term finance. So when they went to roll the loan over at the end of the year, banks weren't lending to anyone. So they said, no, we don't want to lend to you anymore. So what happens then is they have this long-term investment that they can no longer finance because they didn't obtain the long-term finance. So therefore, what happens is they are forced to pretty much sell the asset. There's nothing much more you can do. You sell the long-term investment and hope to not gain that much of a loss, because if you're going to sell quick and you have to sell quick, the market's going to know that and they're not going to pay market value, especially not when you're in a credit crunch. So most assets are significant in a business that require finance. However, most lenders prefer to issue short-term finance because it's lower risk. So we have what we call a maturity mismatch that exists within the market. So there's two main types of finance. There's direct finance, which is also referred to as sort of wholesale finance. And what happens here is that the suppliers of funds go straight to the users of funds, and we get a financial instrument going that way. Now, brokers and people can be used in this, brokers and dealers can be used in this transaction. So don't get that confused with an intermediary, as we're going to talk about later. It's still the users and suppliers directly negotiating with each other. So then what we have in contrast to this is what we refer to as intermediated finance, and this is retail finance. So if you go to the bank, you're going to be looking at intermediated finance, because although you might think the bank is a supplier of funds, they're really just an intermediary. Okay, so what happens here is that the supplier of funds supplies funds to the intermediary, who then supplies it to the user. However, two instruments are formed here, two financial instruments. So there are various benefits that can be shown within both of these. So with direct finance, you've obviously got greater flexibility and diversification of funding sources. You can negotiate directly with your supplier of funds. However, with intermediated finance, we solve this problem of maturity transformation. So remember how I said there's a maturity mismatch? What they can actually do then is start to package different short-term securities together to form a long-term finance solution for the user. So we've got a maturity transformation of funds. We've also got various economies of scales in terms of search cost and risk information. So all your information is together in the one place, whereas if you're going to get funds from a certain supplier directly, you're going to have to spend a lot of money researching to figure out their risk. And other benefits that come with it is just liquidity transformation and asset transformation, which is pretty much tied in within this maturity transformation. The idea that they can then get lots of different instruments with lots of different forms and maturities and package them together. So you've got this transformation in terms of maturity, liquidity, and asset type from the supplier to the user.